Welcome to A Slice with Dice, a podcast exploring the ideas, pressures, and possibilities shaping how we learn, lead, and grow. I'm Corey Alderdice. For over 20 years, my work has lived at the intersection of gifted education, leadership development, and school culture, supporting students as they find their strengths, educators as they stretch their thinking, and schools as they build pathways that expand opportunity. Ready to dive in? Here's this week's Slice.
There are certain debates in education that seem to operate on an endless loop. Every year or two, a new report is released. A headline captures national attention, and within hours, people have settled back into positions they've occupied for years. We rarely change anyone's mind because more often than not, we're having the same conversation we've had dozens of times before. The debate surrounding New York City's specialized high schools has become one of those conversations. This summer, the latest admissions numbers reignited familiar arguments after just 3 black students were admitted to Stuyvesant High School's incoming freshman class. Now, critics pointed to the figures as evidence that the admissions system continues to produce deeply inequitable outcomes. Defenders responded that the Specialized High Schools Admissions Test, or SHSAT, remains one of the last objective measures of academic readiness, insisting that the problem lies not with the exam, but with unequal educational opportunities long before students ever sit down to take it. Both sides made arguments we've heard before. Both raised legitimate concerns. And as I followed the discussion yet again, I found myself less interested in deciding which side was right than in wondering whether they were actually answering the same question. Because the more I think on it, the more it seems possible that the real tension isn't between merit and equity at all. It may be that we've spent decades asking one kind of school to accomplish 2 fundamentally different educational missions. Now, that distinction matters because despite how often we use the word gifted, we don't always distinguish between identifying talent and developing talent. And those sound like 2 ways of describing the same work, but in practice, they require very different assumptions about what a school and a specialized school exist to do. Now, one perspective sees a specialized school primarily as an accelerator. Its role is to identify students who are already exceptionally prepared and place them in an environment where they can move at a pace that would be difficult, let alone impossible to replicate most anywhere else. Students challenge one another. Teachers assume a high degree of independence. The curriculum begins where many schools leave off. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that model. In fact, for many students, it's exactly the right and much needed model. But another perspective begins from a different place. It assumes extraordinary potential is distributed far more broadly than extraordinary opportunity. Some students arrive having benefited from years of advanced coursework, enrichment, tutoring, or schools with robust gifted programming. Others possess every bit as much intellectual promise, but have simply traveled a different educational path. If specialized education exists to cultivate talent wherever it is found, then the institution itself has to be designed differently. It can't merely identify excellence. It has to help produce it. And those are both legitimate educational missions. And I'm not convinced they're always the same mission. One lesson that has stayed with me throughout my career is that by the time students reach 8th grade, we're rarely measuring ability in isolation. We're measuring years of accumulated opportunity. Reading habits, mathematical pathways, access to enrichment, family resources, school expectations, mentors, peers, all of those experiences compounded over time. A 13-year-old simply doesn't arrive at an admissions exam carrying aptitude. They arrive carrying a history. Now, recognizing that doesn't invalidate academic achievement, it simply reminds us that achievement itself has a context. During my years leading selective residential STEM high schools, and certainly during my time working in admissions, I came to appreciate just how different the work of selecting students is from the work of developing them. Those two ideas often become conflated because they occur within the same institution, but they require different organizational competencies. Admitting talented students is really only the beginning. Helping students from very different educational backgrounds flourish in the same demanding environment, though, requires advising, mentoring, academic support, bridge experiences, and an institutional culture intentionally designed around growth without compromising rigor. So in other words, the admissions process is really only one part of the equation. The design of the institution matters just as much. Perhaps that's the part of the New York conversation that receives the least attention. For more than a century, Stuyvesant, Bronx Science, and Brooklyn Technical High School have been internationally respected because they have remained remarkably consistent in their mission. They were built to serve students already prepared for exceptionally rigorous academic experience. Over generations, they refined that model, developed extraordinary faculty, cultivated incredible alumni networks, and established cultures that continue to attract some of the most academically accomplished students in the country. Now, if that's the mission those schools were designed to fulfill, perhaps they should continue fulfilling it. But acknowledging that possibility doesn't require concluding that every specialized school should be organized precisely around the same philosophy. In fact, if New York City were creating its specialized high school system from scratch today instead of over the course of the last century, I doubt we would build 9 schools that all define excellence in essentially the same way, because our understanding of talent has changed too much. We've become increasingly aware that intellectual potential develops along different trajectories. Some students need an environment that matches where they already are. Others need an environment capable of accelerating what they might become. Those aren't competing visions of excellence, but they are very different expressions of it. That makes me wonder whether the next chapter in specialized education isn't changing schools like Stuyvesant so much as expanding the ecosystem around them. Imagine a third wave of New York City specialized schools whose defining characteristic wasn't simply science, engineering, or the humanities, but mission. Some schools would remain accelerators designed for those students already operating at extraordinary academic levels. Others might intentionally focus on talent development, identifying students whose growth, resilience, creativity, and trajectory suggest exceptional promise, even if their preparation has been less than complete. Their expectations would remain equally ambitious, but their organizational design would acknowledge that excellence sometimes emerges through different pathways and along different timelines. And that distinction may seem subtle, but I think it's incredibly important. We often talk about specialized students, but we spend far less time talking about specialized institutions. In medicine, we don't expect every hospital to perform every function equally well. Trauma centers, children's hospitals, rehabilitation hospitals, and cancer institutes all pursue the same overarching goal of improving health, but each specializes in a different stage or element of that journey. No one assumes excellence requires every institution to do everything, but education rarely grants itself that same freedom. Instead, we often expect a single school to identify exceptional students, remedy long-standing inequities, accelerate advanced learning, cultivate future scientists, provide comprehensive support services, and somehow optimize every one of those goals simultaneously. That's an extraordinary burden to place on any institution, especially when some of the objectives inevitably pull in different directions. Maybe that's why this debate has remained unresolved for so long. We've treated it primarily as a disagreement over admissions policy, when it may actually be a question of institutional design. At the end of the day, I don't think that answer is eliminating the admissions exam or preserving the schools exactly as they are. I don't even know that the most important question is whether Stuyvesant should or ought to change. I find myself asking something different. What if excellence and opportunity don't have to compete inside the same school? What if a stronger educational system isn't one that asks every specialized institution to accomplish every worthy goal, but one that builds different kinds of schools capable of pursuing different missions exceptionally well? Perhaps the future of specialized education isn't choosing between excellence and opportunity, but maybe it's having the imagination to build institutions that honor both.
A Slice with Dice is a production of Aldercube. Thanks for making time to reflect with me. If you're finding value in these episodes, I hope you'll subscribe and help spread the word. Until next time, lead boldly, listen closely, and keep pushing forward. I'll see you then.